Title: The Shadow of Midnight, a sleep paralysis horror. Part 1: The Awakening. Sarah Jenkins, a 27-year-old graphic designer, had always struggled with insomnia. One particularly exhausting day at work, she finally collapsed into bed, hoping for a restful night. The room was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of a streetlight seeping through the curtains. Sarah drifted into a deep sleep, only to awaken with a start. Her chest felt as though it was being crushed, and she found herself unable to move. Her eyes darted around in panic, landing on a dark, shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure seemed to pulse with an eerie, malevolent energy. As it drew closer, Sarah's breath quickened, but she was paralyzed, unable to scream or escape. The figure's presence was overwhelming, and just as it seemed to reach out towards her, Sarah finally managed to let out a strangled cry. The figure vanished, leaving her gasping for air and drenched in sweat. Part 2: The Haunting begins. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's nightmares intensified. Each night, the shadowy figure returned, its form becoming more distinct and ominous. It seemed to take on a more defined, humanoid shape with glowing eyes that followed her every move. The once comfortable confines of her home now felt like a prison, filled with an oppressive sense of dread. Sarah confided in her friend Emily, describing the sinister figure and her experiences. Emily suggested it might be due to stress, but Sarah was not convinced. The shadow's increasingly bold appearances made her believe there was something far more sinister at work. Part 3: The Research. Desperate for answers, Sarah delved into research about sleep paralysis. She discovered that it was a condition where a person, upon waking or falling asleep, experiences temporary paralysis and vivid hallucinations. Many accounts described similar shadowy figures and intense feelings of fear. While understanding the condition provided some rational explanations, it did little to ease her terror. Sarah's anxiety grew, and her waking hours were consumed by the fear of what awaited her each night. Her once peaceful life was now overshadowed by a constant sense of impending doom. Part 4: The Confrontation. One particularly terrifying night, Sarah experienced her most intense episode of paralysis. The shadow figure seemed more malevolent than ever, its presence accompanied by a sinister, whispering voice. The voice taunted her, claiming that it had always been with her, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The room seemed to close in on her as the shadow's whispers grew louder and more mocking. Sarah's fear reached a peak, and she summoned every ounce of her willpower to break free from the paralysis. As she finally managed to move, the figure abruptly vanished, leaving her in an eerie silence. Despite the quiet, the oppressive feeling lingered, leaving Sarah both relieved and terrified. Part 5: The Turning Point. Sarah's deteriorating mental state began to affect every aspect of her life. She could barely function at work, and her relationships were strained. Emily, seeing her friends suffering, suggested performing a cleansing ritual in Sarah's home. Though skeptical, Sarah agreed, hoping for any form of relief. The ritual involved burning sage and reciting protective incantations. As they chanted, the temperature in the room dropped significantly, and a sudden gust of wind extinguished the sage. Despite the ritual's unsettling conclusion, Sarah felt a fleeting sense of relief. However, the comfort was short-lived as the shadow figure returned with renewed intensity. Part 6: The Climax. That night, the shadow figure seemed to be feeding off Sarah's fear. It appeared more menacing than ever, its eyes burning with a fiery intensity. The paralysis was almost unbearable, and the shadow's presence felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. The figure reached out with icy hands, brushing against her skin, and its guttural laughter echoed in her mind. It felt as if the entity was testing her sanity and willpower. Sarah realized that the shadow was not merely a figment of her imagination, but a dark force thriving on her terror. The struggle for control became a nightly battle, leaving her mentally and physically exhausted. Part 7. The Resolution. In a final attempt to reclaim her life, Sarah sought help from a sleep specialist who also had expertise in spiritual disturbances. The specialist taught her techniques to manage her sleep paralysis and suggested moving to a new location, as the disturbances might be linked to the energy of her current home. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to relocate. After moving and applying the new techniques, the frequency of her episodes diminished. While the shadow figure no longer plagued her nightly, the experience left an indelible mark on her psyche. The fear never fully dissipated, but Sarah had managed to regain control of her life, learning to cope with the lingering echoes of the darkness that had once consumed her.